Welcome back to the Now Morning Show at 6:37 a.m. in Trinidad and Tobago, and a classic in the background to introduce our next conversation. Joining us in studio this morning is the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary to Caricom for the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to Caricom, Her Excellency Jennifer Marchand, and Assistant Secretary General of Caricom, Wayne Mccook. And we're speaking about the CSME National Consultations happening right here in Trinidad and Tobago. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. It is an absolute pleasure. One can only imagine how busy both of you are, given the ongoing consultations. Ambassador, if we could kindly start with you. These national consultations are on the CSME implementation, arrangements and procedures, and so much more. Could you provide some more details to us as to why we're going about this now and what's going to be taking place?
Okay. These consultations actually are part of the Secretariat's work program in terms of the activities that are geared towards improving and enhancing the arrangements and procedures with respect to the CSME. 5 consultations have already taken place across the community, and so Trinidad and Tobago is the 6th member state to host the consultations. These consultations involve a range of stakeholders because the governments are not the only partners in terms of community activities. So while the team from the Secretariat, which is being led by Ambassador Mccook, Assistant Secretary General, will be meeting with government senior officials, they will also be engaging the private sector and the media and educational institutions. Yesterday we spent the entire day in Tobago, so it is about getting the range of views from a diverse range of stakeholders in terms of their inputs into making the CSME more meaningful to the people of the community. I would also just wish to say that it is part of also assessing Trinidad and Tobago's state of implementation of the various procedures. So the Secretariat would want to see where we are on track, and they also would wish to gain insight on where our shortcomings are so that we can arrive at solutions to wherever there are difficulties and challenges with us in our implementation.
Now, thus far, what has the reception been like? I know that it's from the period of the 18th, so we're really just starting. But what has the reception been like from those stakeholders? Have they been very forthcoming with information and invested in this?
Yes. Well, we had the opening ceremony on Tuesday morning, and present there were actually representatives of a number of the stakeholders, so they were already very well represented and certainly very invested in the consultations taking place this week. On Tuesday afternoon, there was also an opportunity for the team to engage with the permanent secretaries and deputy permanent secretaries from the stakeholder ministries. And as I indicated yesterday in Tobago, we met with the THA, which would be the executive or political leadership of Tobago. They too were present across the board at the administrator level and at the member of the THA level. We also had a very good engagement with the private sector in the afternoon, which was also streamed live. And there was a very good engagement with schools. And we actually launched a social media competition for schools. So it has been, so far, exceedingly stimulating, I think, for those who have participated. And of course, we look forward to further activities today, which will involve the private sector in Trinidad and tomorrow we will be at the University of the West Indies.
It's beautiful to see that there are so many positive things coming out of this, and of course the involvement of the younger generation, who would have been, some of them wouldn't have been a thought when the CSME first came into being, for want of a better expression. Assistant Secretary General, again, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you. Can we speak a little bit about the role of the Caricom Secretariat in advancing the integration movement in the Caribbean, and really how far we have come with regional integration?
Thank you very much for having me, and I think Jennifer has framed the activities here in Trinidad and Tobago very, very well, and it paints a picture of the partnership between the Secretariat and counterparts in member states committed to advancing the single market and economy. The team that has come to Trinidad and Tobago, as Jennifer has said, would have been meeting across the region and will continue to do so, to work with ministries, agencies, stakeholders, to see where we are in national implementation of single market obligations, and to support the teams that do this. So the meeting with the permanent secretaries and deputy permanent secretaries, for example, would have been aimed to discuss with them the specific actions that their agencies and ministries would be taking to advance specific parts of a single market agenda. We're familiar with the free movement agenda, and in that area, for example, Trinidad and Tobago has been exemplary in the digitalization of its skills regime procedures, for example. So discussing how this is done not only tells us where Trinidad and Tobago's performance stands in terms of implementation, but it also gives examples that we can take across the region to others to improve and enhance the ways in which they carry forward the single market agenda. We have to realize that it's not the glass half empty, it's probably the glass half full. The quantity one can discuss in terms of the state of implementation of the single market, but there are some parts of it that are quite mature. For example, the trade in goods regime, in which Trinidad and Tobago has historically been a leader in the region. The Trinidad and Tobago exports more than $1 billion US worth of goods to the Caribbean community, and this has helped to develop stable supply chains for the needs of people across the community, and also strengthen Trinidad and Tobago businesses. So we want to discuss how are these advances being made, how do we sustain and keep them, and also how can we go further.
No, in light of that, as you mentioned, seeing what's happening in Trinidad and Tobago and the fact that we've already had some consultations in other areas in the region, is that we're looking towards the possibility of streamlining everything, or maybe just taking different parts that we can see how we can mold it into the specific regional culture?
Well, one always in an integration movement tries to harmonize and streamline. That's the objective. But we are also a community of sovereign members. So you have to balance the regional agenda with the national agenda and do so in a way that brings benefits to the member states individually and also to the community collectively. And striking that balance is what the single market and economy has consistently sought to do. Not to do something that is not in the interest of a member state, and to do everything that is in the interest of the community and the member state together. And the concept of a single market and all integration movements is to bring the advantages of critical mass, more acting together to do the things, many of which can't be done effectively enough individually. And that's really what is driving the single market. One of the original objectives was, for example, in terms of production, and I've mentioned the performance, for example, in trade in the region, is to enable markets to be expanded for domestic producers, and also to create stable sources of supply for different products in the region. And I've focused a little bit on trade in goods, but the discussions largely nowadays turn on services, movement of people. And that is where the community is now poised to make significant further steps.
Wonderful. Something that you would have mentioned, Your Excellency, would have been some of the challenges just a little bit earlier. Can we maybe just touch on those briefly, what we have experienced thus far and how we're overcoming them as a region?
Yes. So, of course, part of the challenges in terms of implementation will involve, for example, amendments of legislation. Because when you talk about, as Ambassador Mccook just said, in terms of the single market arrangements, in order to make that work effectively and meaningfully, you have to enact legislation, or you have to amend existing legislation, because we are talking about persons moving, exercising their rights. If we're dealing with the trade in goods, there are also certain legal underpinnings that are applicable there. So an important aspect of that is to have the buy-in from the relevant ministries that really lead that charge on the national front. Of course, in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, it is the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs. So they have been, thankfully for us, a very, very important and supportive partner in terms of getting movement on the issue of the enaction of our legislative framework. And of course, the whole matter as well of resources, the allocation of resources. The Ministry of Foreign and Caricom Affairs is responsible overall for Caricom matters in Trinidad and Tobago, but there are also specific line ministries' responsibilities. So, for example, the Ministry of Trade and Industry or the Ministry of Education. And so it is very important to have the support and the meaningful assistance from those ministries with regard to the implementation of our arrangements and procedures. I should also add as well national security, the immigration division, because they too, they are essentially the first encounter that CARICOM nationals have upon entry into Trinidad and Tobago. So they are very vital stakeholder as well.
A team effort, to say the least.
Yes.
Everybody having to come together.
Everybody, yes.
And of course, we need to do our part as well and be informed and understand what is going on, which is why we're having these consultations. Now, we are coming to the end of our conversation, but before we get to that, we just had the 48th regular meeting of the Conference of the Heads of CARICOM. Can we speak a little bit about some of the outcomes and maybe just touch again on the free movement of people, Ambassador?
The most recent meeting of the heads of government made a significant step forward on a number of issues, and certainly giving effect to the decision for full free movement would have been one of those. And that, of course, was driven first by the decision also here at the heads of government meeting held in Trinidad and Tobago in 2023, when the push was for full free movement was accelerated. What this most recent decision of heads did was to confirm the move to finalize the signatures of the protocol on enhanced cooperation. What that protocol will do is allow all the members who are ready to move to do so in a manner that is consistent with the treaty itself. We expect that these signatures, we're clear that these signatures will be done in advance of the time given. The time given by the heads in that decision was the 31st of March. And that would then allow the second part of that decision of heads, which is to have full free movement by those who are in a position to do so by the 1st of June. So that in itself represents a step forward in bringing what the community has been anxiously wanting to see, to bring that into fruition as soon as possible.
Excellent. Well, on behalf of all of us here at CT Limited Media Network, thank you so much for joining us this morning, Ambassador Mccook and Your Excellency, Ambassador Extraordinary. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Hoping that you both have an excellent day and that the consultations go incredibly well, which we know they will as you continue to enjoy our Trinbagonian hospitality.
Thank you very much for having us.
Our pleasure. This is the Now Morning Show.